Doug Chamberlain, you were here about 15 months ago, here at John Brown University about 15 months ago. You were part of a big event we had, 3 John Brown University alumni who served in Vietnam. And that event was recorded, and so some of your memories are recorded there. Also, you were here in the studio the day after that, and we talked about some of your experiences in Vietnam. But the one thing we didn't really talk about at that time was really the central theme, or the most powerful story, or at least it's the story that is gotten at in the title. The title of your memoir is "Bury Him," and then above the title there's a quote, "Don't rock the boat. This is an order." And we'll talk about what that story is, but we didn't record a discussion about that last time because we wanted to wait. The book was in process, and there was still some work to do. So you've come back 15 months later to discuss that, and so that's what we'll do. And I'm grateful that you're here. But just to get us started, what made you decide to write this memoir after nearly 50 years went by?
Excuse me. Different people in my life had suggested that I ought to write a book about my Vietnam experience, but the people that were suggesting that really didn't know what they were suggesting, because they didn't know what all I would have included, in which I now have. And so a student of mine, when I got out of the service, I came back to, I started law school at the University of Wyoming.
Yeah.
Went there a semester, and then I went home. Just wasn't ready to be inside of a classroom setting.
Yeah.
I went home and started a small custom farming business. And my dad was still farming and ranching, and I helped him.
Yeah.
And then a teaching and coaching job at LaGrange, Wyoming, and LaGrange High School opened up. And so I applied and took a job. One of those students that I had in those 4 years that I taught and coached there was named Brent Kaufman, rancher's son. And so since that time, Brent went on and became a veterinarian. And it was about, over 4.5 years ago now, I had a cow in his veterinary clinic. He was working on it, and we were laughing about the old days and when I coached him and taught him and everything. And then all of a sudden, his whole demeanor just changed, and he just looked at me and he said, I always wondered why you were so mad and angry.
Wow.
And it really kind of shocked me.
Did he say that after you had mentioned something about Vietnam?
Or no, we were just laughing and talking.
Oh, wow.
And then it struck me that here's a young guy who didn't know me before I had gone to Vietnam. His first exposure to me was when I became his coach and his teacher.
Wow.
And so I thought about that for several months. It really was a burden on me. And so I finally thought, I think I will. I think I'll try to write a book.
To tell the story. Did you respond to him and say that maybe it had some link to your time, your 13 months in Vietnam?
No.
Did you, in your mind, did you make a connection immediately?
Oh, well, I think the connection was, what struck me was, he never knew me before. All he saw was this mad, angry person, which I didn't know that's the way I was viewed. I mean, I always felt like when I got back I was different. People treated me different, I thought, and of course, if you talk to them, they'd tell you I was different.
Sure, yeah.
So it was kind of a dose of reality, if you will,
Yeah.
bucket of cold water in the face.
Yeah.
But it appeared to me to be of some real consequence. And I've been on the Wyoming Board of Parole for now 7 years, and one of the tools they use in working with the criminal population in the institutions is journaling.
Yeah.
And they found that exercise of writing down things,
Sure.
there is some therapeutic value to that.
Yeah.
And not that I felt like I necessarily at that point had committed a crime, but I knew that I had a real burden about something I'd done that I believed was wrong.
Yeah.
And so, long
Yeah.
story short, that all kind of came together, and
Yeah.
after 4 or 5 months, I started off trying to write a book about my memory, which you would call the memoirs.
Yeah.
And the problem I had, though, with that, Preston, was, 50 years in a fog of war, after a while you begin to think, well, now, is that really what happened? Am I really remembering this right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus, I didn't have enough documentation to put stuff in the right chronological order, because I could remember things here and things there. But so I started writing, and I don't remember when I had a conversation with John Brown III about that I was actually going to write a book. But somewhere in the midst of all that trying to write, he and I had a conversation, and he encouraged me. He didn't have any idea at the time what I was really talking about as far as subject matter, other than just it was my memoirs. And so I wrote for a while, and then I got to the point where I couldn't put any more together, and I didn't have the much documentation, but the driving force was that I had been ordered to bury a Marine in Vietnam, which is probably one of the most dishonorable and controversial things that can ever happen to anybody. And I'm talking about the victim in this case, that young Marine.
Yeah. Well, let's go to that. Now, in your memoir, covers more than this story, which I think the title and suggests to me that this is the central story. But I was just talking with a Vietnam vet just yesterday or the day before, and he experienced some combat, and there was one where there was an ongoing battle for 3 days. But a lot of his time in Vietnam, he was on base and doing administrative kind of stuff, so it was sort of a mixed story. You meet other vets who, maybe had an incident or two, but, are basically in the rear echelon. But then you have vets, and like yourself, I mean, this memoir, it's just sort of one heavy event after another. And you take out the major event that we're going to focus on here, and you walk away from this memoir and you say, wow, I mean, this guy saw a lot of combat. But then you add this other story, and it's a lot to pack into 13 months. It's a lot to pack into 13 months.
It is,
as a
but
Marine.
I don't want anyone to ever read this book and think that I'm trying to dramatize my service.
No. And
there are a lot of people that went through a lot more than I did, I'm sure. But
Well,
on the other hand, and a friend of mine read my book, and I spoke to a Rotary Club in Torrington, Wyoming recently about the book. And unbeknownst to me, he bought the book and he read it, and 2 weeks after I spoke to the Rotary Club, they said he got up and said that he had read the book, and he said, I'd recommend that you all read it, so the next time you thank somebody from your service for their service, you know what you're thanking them for.
Oh yeah.
And so,
Sure.
it's a foreign thing to people who haven't been in combat situation.
You're right.
And I understand that.
Yeah, and so some of the things you describe in the memoir come up in a lot of other memoirs. Every story is unique, but there are a lot of similarities. But there is the central story, the story that your title gets at, which in my experience is I haven't heard or read another story just like it. I've heard somewhat similar things, but not a story just like it. So let's walk through it. I mean, the title of the memoir is Bury Him, and then you have this quote, "Don't rock the boat, this is an order." If you could just, take us from, maybe, 10 minutes before the story begins to unfold. Where were you in South Vietnam? What was the mission? And then how did you become aware of the situation? Then how did it go from there?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you a little bit of history
Sure.
of military history of what was going on at that time. But at that particular time, in January 1st of 1968, there were 81,000 and some odd Marines in Vietnam, and my company and me, we were part of that. And over the next 6 months of the Tet Offensive occurred, January 31st of 1968. And when the Tet Offensive happened, from the tactical standpoint, what the United States was trying to do was defend South Vietnam instead of offensively attack North Vietnam, other than by aircraft.
Yeah.
So when the Tet Offensive was over, and the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong suffered, immense casualties, but as they withdrew, tactically we didn't pursue them. We just stayed in the defensive positions where we were, and so they withdrew in the area of Vietnam I was in, South Vietnam I was in, they withdrew southwest of Da Nang into an area that is referred to as Go Noi Island. It really wasn't an island, but there were rivers on two sides of it, and that's what it was referred to.
Yeah.
And what it had actually become then, according to the intelligence sources, was a place where they virtually, it was like an R&R area. They had all kinds of supplies, and because nobody pursued them, they were able to get there and regroup.
NVA or VC or both? Or?
Both.
Okay, yeah.
And of course, just to the west of that was one of several access routes off the Ho Chi Minh Trail into the Da Nang area. So instead of the United States taking the position of pursuing these people, and we could have, more than likely, if reading the North Vietnamese documents now, we could have ended that war had we tactically done that, but they didn't. So they began to regroup and rearm and bring in more reinforcements, and so that led up to an operation called Operation Worth. And Operation Worth was an offensive to try to, I'm not contradicting myself, but an offensive to try to block, their traffic coming back into the Da Nang area.
Yeah.
And so there were 2 battalions involved. A battalion is 4 rifle companies, and that is in just round numbers would be about 800 per battalion. So there were 2 battalions involved: 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and the battalion I was in, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Well, part of the tactics also in that war were that companies like mine, 180, 200 men, operated a lot on their own, different than the classical military tactics of large-scale units maneuvering, and of course the terrain prohibited some of that style because of the jungles and everything, and so it's a different scenario.
Right.
So we were sent out there, and I was operating by myself on that particular operation. And one night we were dug in on a ridge line because every time when nightfall came, you wanted to make sure you were in a defensible position. And and one of those cautions is always you want to occupy the high ground if you possibly can.
Sure,
And so we were on a ridge, and I got a call on the radio that 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, remember I was in 2nd Battalion, 7th, but 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, which was about a mile and a half, 2 miles away on another ridge, was about to be overrun, and that at first light we were going to be picked up and hauled by helicopter into an area where we could try to get to them and reinforce them.
Yeah.
So that all transpired, but in that particular case, they didn't try to drop us in where they were up on that ridge. They put us down in the valley between us, and then said, "Go up there."
Oh, gosh.
And of course, it wasn't a laughing matter, but you have to, looking back, you have to see some humor in the ignorance that was involved. But anyway, we we finally were able to get up them. It took us all day, and we joined them just about dark when we hooked up. And so then the command of my unit and my commander then became the commander of 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. So I was attached to them. And the colonel, who was battalion commander, told me that he wanted me to move my men out on a kind of a rocky area about, I'd say 200 yards outside of the main battalion, which we did. And of course, we were fortunate nothing happened during the night because we couldn't dig in. It was solid rock.
Oh yeah.
But the next morning I sent out patrols, and it wasn't long at all till I got a call on the radio from Lieutenant Jim Pippin, who now lives in Mississippi and is a native of Mississippi, I think. And he was the 2nd Platoon commander, and he said, Skipper, you need to come over here. And so I went not too far away, and it was an area where there were a lot of bomb craters. Obviously, there'd been some action in there before. And in the bottom of this one bomb crater, one of his platoons had, his squads had found a Marine that had been left behind. And
a Marine killed in action.
Yeah.
A dead Marine, yeah.
And he was partially decomposed, obviously, but he was laying on a poncho. You could tell somebody had been carrying him. And there were open sea rations around him, like somebody had been there eating and then took off and left. But he was missing his left leg. And dog tags were still on him. And so, it was just total shock. None of us could believe what we were seeing. But
is that because, a major theme of this story is, the Marine left behind, right? Are you saying that no one could believe what they were seeing because it looked as if a Marine had been left behind?
Well, he had been left behind.
He had been left behind.
Yeah, there wasn't any doubt about it.
Yeah.
And of course, I was telling you about the 81,000 Marines there at the beginning of 1968. Another demographic of that war was that of the 58,000, 256 or whatever that figure is that were killed, almost 40,000 of those were 18 years old.
Wow. 40,000 of the 58,000 killed in the Vietnam War were 18.
Were 18 or less or younger. And that just brings home the old adage that if old men had to fight the wars, there wouldn't be any. And the youth get sent off to do those sort of things. And in this case, this was the youth of America, and I was one of them.
Yeah.
So these 18-year-old kids see this. There could have been nothing worse as far as they were concerned than to think that this guy had been left behind, or this Marine had been left behind. So I told him, I said, well, go on and keep patrolling, and I'll take care of this. So I called the people who were now my commanders in 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. I said I needed a medevac. They had a KIA, and I read them. We had a code, I guess we could call it a code we used to transfer the information that this was a Kilo India Alpha, meaning KIA, and what his name was and what his service number was and everything. And so, because I was in such shock, I just thought, and it was so close to where they were anyway. Yeah, I just thought, it was just overwhelming, and all I could think of, we need to get this guy medevaced out of here or transported out of here.
Yeah.
So I called and asked for a helicopter to pick up his remains, and they refused. And
so, no reason was given?
Well,
said
it was just my radio operator and I talking to him, and we were in total shock too when we heard they said no, you can't have a helicopter, and so I didn't know what to say. So finally they came back on the air and they said, "Did you copy my last?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't believe it." And that's when whoever I was talking to came back and said, "Don't rock the boat. this is an order, bury him.
So you were told the helo's not going to come and get him. You're not told why a helo can't come and get him.
No, well, they just said, they first said, just bury him. That's all. That was the only response.
Yeah.
When I said, well, I need a helicopter.
Yeah.
And they said, no, just bury him.
Now,
And
there
so-
weren't any firefights in the area? I mean, you know, like, if the situation's too hot, maybe we can't get a helo in, but there was nothing like that going on at that time?
I have to give you a little more history. Remember, this was on the 25th of March. Turns out he was killed on the 15th of February.
Good grief.
And so he'd been laying there.
Wow.
And at that particular time, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with and trying to answer your question, but so they said, don't rock a boat, this is an order, bury him. So I got a hold of my the lieutenant who was acting as my executive officer and a staff sergeant, because I didn't want any of the men involved with having to do that, and I had them help me because there was absolutely nothing I could do.
Because you can't carry the body out.
We couldn't take him with us. I mean,
take him with you.
It would compromise our mission something horribly, and then the psychological shock of that to my men was just absolutely overwhelming. And it would have been unsafe for a lot of reasons. So that's what we did. Unbeknownst to me, and well, I'd back up again. I didn't want it marked. I didn't want the grave marked because I was afraid the North Vietnamese or Viet Cong would find that. And with all the anti-war activity we had going on in this country, and we weren't insulated from that. We heard Jane Fonda on Hanoi Hannah radio show out of Hanoi and all that.
Yeah.
But I thought I would be able to see where he was from the air, where we.
You wanted to
buried
find
him.
a marker, so when you came back, you'd know where to go to get him.
Well, no, I thought I could just tell from, I checked, I walked around, looked at the area, and I felt like I could identify that bomb crater from the air.
Okay, yeah.
Well, the men were just incensed. In fact, I about a month ago, I was in Newport, Rhode Island to a reunion of my basic school class. We were all lieutenants, and one of my men lives in the south end of Cape Cod, and I went over and spent the night with him, and he told me then, and it's the first time that I'd known that, he said that they actually discussed killing me.
Because you obeyed the order,
Yeah,
really?
because, and you have to understand, we were all young, but they were a lot younger than I was, most of them. And in a command situation where you operate as a company by yourself, you're responsible for all resupplies, as far as food and everything. You're responsible for resupply of ammunition. You're responsible for their medical health. You're responsible for artillery fire. You're responsible for naval gunfire. You're responsible for close air support. You're responsible for what tactics you're going to use. You're responsible for medevacs when they're injured or killed. And
Sure.
and I'm not saying that they worship you for that, but they know that that's what your responsibilities are. And they thought that I was making an exception to those responsibilities, and they just couldn't believe that I didn't have an answer.
And as you look back, I mean, I'm sure you've run this table over many times in your life, but
Not over 1,000 times or so.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you look back, and you haven't been able to find any way, that it was possible to get that soldier out, right? Because you'd have to take him down a steep
Well, no,
decline, right?
I mean,
and then you've got a lot of enemy around.
We had offensive operations going on. We
Right,
in the
yeah,
jungle.
that's right. Yeah.
You can't be carrying a body. It'd take 4 or 5 people be carrying this body along. Not to mention the smell and I mean it was impossible. But I couldn't think of anything else to do.
Right.
And I took an oath
Yeah.
obey and
Yeah.
defend the Constitution and follow orders from those who were my superiors, including the President of the United
Sure.
States. That's what you do in the military, and
Yeah.
this just is something that should have never happened.
I guess the mystery to me, you know, I've heard of situations where requests for helos to come in are denied because, you know, the situation's too hot, you know, and so we don't want to send out helos and get them shot down. But that doesn't sound like that was the case
Well,
here. So
no, but
that's-
you are getting to another part of the story.
Yeah.
There was. I'm going to have to jump back and forth here a little bit, but after this happened, then eventually, a couple days later, we were released from control of 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and we were flown back and rejoined 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, which was my original command unit.
Yeah.
And I reported it. And when I did, you know, there was all kinds of problems erupted, resulting in, and I didn't know this until about a year and a half ago, in an Article 31 investigation. And in the military, that's a criminal investigation.
Article 31 meaning, what does that mean?
Of the United States Military Code of Justice.
Right.
And
But-
that's a separate,
Yeah.
judicial system, if you will, separate from
Right.
what we have in
Yeah.
the civilian
But
world.
Article 31 is related to what infraction?
It's a criminal investigation.
Oh, okay, okay, criminal
If
investigation.
if
is what it
if
means,
there's
yeah.
been suspected criminal activity, they call it an Article
I
31
see.
investigation. And it's handled just
I
like
see,
in the
yeah.
civilian world. You have investigators, you have sworn testimony,
Yeah.
and there are consequences. So, which can be court-martials or whatever.
Hmm.
So, when I reported that they initiated an Article 31 investigation unbeknownst to me, and I never knew it all these years because they never came back and talked to me about it.
Wow.
They just carried out that investigation, and so what the investigation revealed. Well, I'll have to back up again. When I reported it to 7th Marine Regiment, keeping in mind that the organization is division, regiment, battalion, and company.
Yeah.
When I reported this to 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, they notified 7th Marine Regiment. 7th Marine Regiment got involved, and they're the ones that handle the investigation and all that from that point on. But what they also did, I told them that I was ready, and I had 13 other volunteers to go back and get him.
Go back and get them.
And so they gave me their aircraft that I felt I needed to do it, and we went back and were able to exhume his remains.
Yeah.
And then we transported him to the morgue in Da Nang, and that was for 50 years. Other than rumors, that's about all I ever knew about until I started trying to write this book.
You
and
started working on this.
And
Yeah.
then, as I mentioned about John Brown III, and I don't recall exactly how the conversation went, but he asked me one time how I was doing on my book after we had discussed it, and I told him I'd kind of hit the wall. And several times he suggested that I contact Paul Simonis, who is a graduate of John Brown, he's a forensic investigator and very, very talented in that regard. And the shame and everything of trying to reconstruct all that, I didn't want to do that. But
Yeah.
when I finally agreed, John contacted Paul Simonis and put us together in
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
And Paul is a very, very intelligent younger man.
Yeah.
But I could tell, 50 years ago, really, I mean, I don't blame him. In fact, I don't know why he ever did it. I didn't hire him to
So
do it. or
you
anything.
related you basically the story you've told me you've related to him. He did, but his initial, and with the idea that maybe he'd investigate it for you, but the initial reaction was a bit of skepticism.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this
I don't
won't go
blame him.
very far.
And
Yeah.
within 2 weeks, he had almost solved the major part of that.
He had things figured out.
And
Yeah.
he knew how to reach. He had done a project for John Brown University of all the JBU graduates who were killed in World War II.
Yeah.
And he'd had all kinds of experience like that. And he was able to even use a map coordinates, almost pinpoint where that burial took place.
So we'll talk about what you discovered. Before we do that, what you learned really since the last time we've talked, or I think you're in the process of learning a lot of new things when you were here 15 months ago. And your book was still in process. We'll talk about that. But a minute ago, you used the word shame, right? This feeling, and I know that this has come up in conversations about this topic with you a number of times. When somebody says, you were in a situation you couldn't take the body out, you were ordered to bury it. There aren't any other options at the time, so you do that. You don't get your junior enlisteds involved. You do it yourself with your lieutenant and your sergeant. As soon as you get back to base, you let the officers know that we've got a Marine out there who's buried. You volunteer to go get him. You go out and get him. And so you'll understand why people will say, well, so it seems like you did everything right. Seems like you did everything right. I mean, all the boxes were checked. What should Captain Chamberlain have done? And it seems like you got it right. So explain that. What is that? What is that sense of? It's an awful situation, right? But but it seems from the point of view of the outsider, it seems like you did everything you could do, right? You did everything right. What is that? What is that about? You think?
In a way. About 10 days ago, a news reporter from the Casper Star Tribune in Casper, Wyoming, was talking to me. They did an article on the book, and she said, and this is somebody that knew absolutely nothing about the military. She's young, very very nice young lady, but
yeah. She
said, well, my editor and I are wondering, what's the big deal?
Mm. Mm.
And I said, well, do you ever watch military recruiting advertisements? She said, yeah. And I said, you ever hear them say, leave no man behind?
Right.
She said, yeah. I said, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
That's what everybody in the military believes should happen, and that they're told will never happen, that they'll never be abandoned no matter what.
Yeah.
But I think, as I told you, I serve on the Wyoming Board of Parole, and just not very long ago, a lady was talking about, and they were a victim, but she was talking about a sexual assault against her, and it was a heinous crime, and it was in the first degree.
Mm.
And she said, it's kind of like having your leg cut off. You can get a new prosthesis and you can learn to walk again, but it'll never be the same. And I thought at the time, that's kind of what this is all about. The reason it's so important to me is because it should have never happened. Should have never been ordered to do it. And the fact, just because I followed up later and were able to recover it, what plagues me is maybe I should have been able to figure out something, just like my men thought I should have.
Yeah.
Not to have to do that. And and what I'm trying to tell you is, once you do something that is so morally and patriotically and whatever other adjective you want to use, wrong. Just saying, well, I straightened out afterwards. I remember reading about in the conflict between the Serbs and the Croatians, when they had their war. The Serbs had captured 2 Croatians, and just out of their utter hatred for each other, the Serbs told this one Croatian, he said, either you bite the testicles off of your friend there, or we're going to kill you both. Now, would if he had done that, and I can't remember now what the outcome of that was, would you say, well, no big deal, you saved his life?
Mm.
And while that seems gross and grotesque,
No, I hear you.
war is grotesque. And
Yeah.
we were always told, absolutely, you would never be left behind. Do I think it might have happened before? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I think it might happen again? Probably will.
Yeah.
But I don't care about all that. This is me, and this were my men,
Yeah, I hear
and that's
you.
why it's important.
I hear you. You're talking about this sense of whatever the right word is, just the depth of feeling you have of being involved in the breach of such a basic principle, even though it wasn't your call, it wasn't your decision, it wasn't your desire, but just being involved in that, and the word that you used a few minutes ago was shame. I'm guessing that has something to do with the response from your Marines as well. You say that, you heard not long ago that some of your Marines actually talked about killing you. And my guess would be, obviously I don't know, but my guess would be that wasn't so much directed at you, because if they run through it rationally, they can see, well, I mean, our captain did everything he could do given the situation. I'm guessing that had more to do with the sense that they find themselves looking into the abyss. You know what I mean? Because this basic principle, with our own eyes, we're watching this principle be breached. What about me? I mean,
That's
you know what I'm
exactly
saying?
right.
Yeah, I mean, what about me? So that I'm guessing that their response has more to do with that. But then, when you're stressed out, you project it on, and usually it's the leader who's gonna catch that. But
Well, if I
yeah,
might,
yeah,
in combat situations, rational thinking doesn't prevail
mm, mm,
in most cases.
yeah,
What you hope you do, that your men are trained well enough that they'll do what you tell them to do.
yeah,
But unfortunately, things deteriorate.
I hear that. I hear that. Well, speaking of a kind of deterioration, we said a few minutes ago that, to me, as we have had this, as we've gone into it this far, the one thing that's really incomprehensible to me is why the helo didn't come. Again, it's not like there's a firefight underway,
Well,
and my understanding from your memoir is that there did seem to be something of a cover-up involved.
the history of it was, and this is in the records that the military record we've been able to find, and the Article 31 investigation verifies this,
Yeah.
which I don't know if I told you in the previous interview, this all ended up involving the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, Secretary of the Navy, Commandant of the Marine Corps, U.S. Senator Bobby Kennedy just before he was assassinated. That's how far this thing went outside of the Article 31 investigation, from a letter that was written by one of my corporals that was sent to the President. But
Yeah.
the history, and it's all documented in the book. I included about 35 pages of government documents to verify what I'm telling you. But on February 15th, 1968, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, was on. They were operating out in this same area,
Yeah.
and they were ambushed by a North Vietnamese force, and I think 4 Marines were killed, and maybe 6 were wounded in that battle. And they finally were able to call in helicopters to get the dead and wounded out, even though there was still a lot of enemy activity. And for some reason, they took out all the other dead and all the wounded except for Michael J. Kelly,
Michael J. Kelly
is who
yeah.
we found. And in our research, we discovered that there was a combat photographer along with Charlie Company, and we were able to talk to him. He has a website and a blog, or whatever you call these technological terms, today, and very active. And he told us that when they couldn't get, apparently they just didn't have room on the choppers. And so he personally carried Michael Kelly until, because they were trying to pull back and get hooked up with the battalion. And he personally carried him to the point where he collapsed. And he said when he came to, that Michael Kelly was laying in this bomb crater. And his leg had been severed by an explosion that possibly a bullet hit a hand grenade on his belt or something, but his leg had been severed, but he carried the entire body and the leg back to there. And they were still in contact. And so what Charlie Company, the commander of Charlie Company, did, he called back the battalion and he said, you know, trying to bring this body with us is compromising my men, and I'd like to be able to leave him here in this bomb crater and we can come back and get him, but we need to get hooked back up so we can, you know, prepare our defenses, because they were being attacked by the North Vietnamese. So somebody in 1st Battalion, 7th Marines told that company commander, yeah, that's fine, go ahead, leave him there. So they withdrew, they got all consolidated, and then the battalion commander of 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, when he found out they had left him, he said, you go back out there and get him, because we don't leave Marines behind. And so the company commander made a decision, I'm not going back out there. And so they asked for volunteers. Turns out that there were 8 Marines volunteered to go back out and get him. And everybody knew it was going to be a very, very treacherous attempt. I mean, and I've never want anybody to think that I'm denigrating those brave Marines that were going to go back out and get him. But they went out there. They said they were taken under fire. They picked up the leg, strapped it on a guy's back, brought it back.
Yeah.
And then that's where the wheels come off the cart. That's when the lie started. They said that was all they could find.
I see, yeah.
Interestingly enough, an arc light strike, which was a B-52 strike of 1,000-pound bombs, was planned for that night in that area where the body was. But it never happened. The mission got canceled. So the rest of the remains of Michael J. Kelly were laying there. They brought the leg back and said that that's all they could find, and thinking that the body was going to be blown up.
I see.
The leg goes to the morgue in Da Nang. Nobody knows whose leg it is.
All right.
So it sits in Da Nang. But in the meantime, the parents of Michael Kelly had been notified their son had been killed on the 15th of February. They were notified on the 19th of February that he had been killed 4 days before, and that his remains would be coming. Well, on their end, no remains show up. Out in the jungle end, the body's still laying there. 1st Battalion, 7th Marines is telling the media. They've got the media in, had a big splash. These guys are brave. They call them the Doom Patrol. And I'm not putting down those young Marines, because somebody in command over them is the one that pulled all this off. So there's articles written in the, I don't know if it's the Navy Times or Stars and Stripes magazines, all those kind of things about these brave Marines who went out there and rescued this Marine. Or brought the remains back.
Brought the remains back, yeah.
So time goes by. Now it's March 25th. I'm attached to 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, and we find the rest of his remains. So when I call back to 1st Battalion, 7th Marines and give them all this information, say, hey, you know, panic sets in. And so there was a pause between as we had this conversation on the radio, and it was like, oh, well, a new battalion commander had just taken over, so he didn't know anything about it. And we limited it down to 2 people who gave me that order. Paul and I did. But, you know, there has to come a time when you do say that enough's enough. It really doesn't make any difference who that was. But the Article 31 investigation...
who gave you the order to bury him? Yeah,
The
yeah.
Article 31 investigation clearly says they called it the tactical commander in the field ordered me to bury him. They don't identify me by name. They only call me the commanding officer of Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Yeah.
So Paul and I felt that was probably enough. And it was for me, and it was my book. So
Yeah.
now, I don't feel vindicated, Preston,
Right,
at all,
yeah.
but I do feel validated.
Yeah.
And for my friends and my family and my grandchildren, you, whoever
Yeah.
I come in contact with through John
Yeah.
Brown University, I want them to know that, the values and the spiritual training I received here is a big part of why I've gotten through this for 50 years.
Mm.
And I'll never forget it. And I want the young people that attend this university to know that that's the cornerstone. That's the foundation of your values. That if you'll stick to the rest of your life,
Yeah.
You'll be what God wants you to be.
Yeah. And all these years you didn't know about the Article 31. That's
No.
just fairly recently. There were, maybe just briefly, we could just touch on a couple things, because there were some things that happened to you when you were still in Vietnam that seemed very fishy and strange. You had conversations. I remember, I think you're flying home from R&R on from Hawaii, and you have a conversation with an officer. I mean, you had a sense there, I think, that something strange was going on, but it would be decades before the story got written. But just briefly, what's one of the, maybe we can think about this officer, related to your R&R, your rest and recreation in Hawaii. I mean,
Well, I was just sitting on the airplane going back from R&R beside an F-4 pilot, the F-4 Phantom,
yeah,
a jet bomber that they used. And we were just small talking, and I said something about, well, have you gotten any distinguished flying crosses? Because I was a private pilot and I wanted to fly in the military and I couldn't.
yeah,
And he said, well, I was put in for one. And he said there was a Marine that got left behind out there in southwest of Da Nang, and these Marines were going out and they got him. And we were put in, and he said we were flying air cover for him while they did that, and he said then it got canceled, and of course that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I looked at him and I said, let me ask you something. Did they tell you to bomb the bomb crater? And he just looked at me, he hit blank, and he said, how did you know that? And I said, because you missed. Because you remember when I said that I picked a bomb crater that I thought I could see from there were bomb craters all over there.
yeah,
And that's another reason that they thought that body or the remains didn't exist, because they called in the,
yeah.
bombing mission for those aircraft, but they didn't hit that exact bomb crater where he was laying.
So if I'm understanding the story, and then we'll sort of sum this up, and then just talk about what you discovered, because you ended up actually being able to meet some of the family members of Michael Kelly.
That was it was late in 2018, and John Brown III and a Marine officer named Colonel John Lauder, and then one of my radio operators named Dr. Don Catherall. He's a professor at Northwestern University. They joined me, and we found PFC Kelly's son, and we found his son's mother. And so they all joined me, and we went to Findlay, Ohio, and sat down with them, had dinner with them, and explained what had gone on. And it was, and I'm not sure even what this term means, because you use so much, but it really was a surreal moment, because here the son had no idea any of this had ever happened. The mother didn't know, and the grandparents are dead, and so it was like, telling them a tale that they. I talked to the son not very long ago, and he still just can't quite put it
So he
together.
knew that his dad had died in Vietnam.
That's all he
but
knew.
that's all
He was
knew.
2 months old when his dad was killed, so he never.
yeah. And the cover-up, basically then it comes down to these guys went out, they did the honorable thing, volunteered to go get the body. In the end, they didn't get the body, they got the leg, but the body's still out there. There is, so then the cover your behind stuff starts from there.
We found a document where the platoon commander for PFC Kelly wrote a letter to the parents saying that they had to leave the body behind, but they went out and within 18 hours they had him behind, friendly lines, and so the parents thought, oh, okay, so he was,
yeah.
But the leg laid in for a month in the morgue in Da Nang,
yeah,
because they didn't know whose leg it was, apparently, or couldn't. So then the parents, the records also show the parents started an investigation of their own. We don't know who was involved with it, trying to figure, our son's remains haven't come home.
Yeah.
Then the military gets involved, and they tell the parents once they admit that they have the leg, if you would like, we can just cremate the remains and send them to you. And the parents said no. And they said, well, we can just bury him at sea then, Said no. Because they didn't want to have to send that leg home to him.
Because they'd been told there's the body.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then the leg gets sent home. They have the funeral planned.
Yeah.
And 2 days before the funeral, we find PFC Kelly. We had gone back and retrieved his remains and taken him to the morgue, and the United States Navy knew then the jig was up.
I see, yeah, yeah.
And so a couple hours before the funeral, they tell the parents, well, this isn't necessarily all his remains.
Maybe more to come.
And so the parents, I thought, well, they didn't say that they knew they had the remains. They had the dog tag, but no. So the parents say, well, we appreciate it. I mean, they were wonderful people, obviously,
Yeah.
and they understood. So they go ahead and have the burial, not knowing it's the leg. A month later, they send the rest of the remains to them. They have to have a second funeral, exhume the casket, and put the remains in the casket, second burial. And all of that, they tried to cover up with lies and misrepresentations.
Yeah. And this is spelled out in the memoir, as you say. You've got some documentation here.
Absolutely.
As we begin to wind down here, is the letter that the Marine wrote to President Johnson, is that reproduced?
It's there.
In here? It's because it's interesting. The envelope, with the word important, underlined, there's no way of knowing, who actually saw that letter and that, but
it's date stamped received at the White House.
Oh yeah, so it gets to the
March 30th.
Gets to the White House.
Back away.
Yeah.
Snail mail, we called it, moved in those days, for a letter to make it from the jungles to the White House in basically 4 days.
Yeah, that's something.
It's just unbelievable.
That's something. When you were here 15 months ago, and we talked about this theme, but things were in the process of heading toward resolution, but there was a lot you still didn't know. But then in pretty short order, a lot of things came together. You learned a lot of things. You actually got to meet Michael Kelly's, his son, and the son's mom, right? Is that right? In Ohio. What has that meant to you in terms of just sort of your own dealing with the memory of this? The word is closure. I don't know if that word fits or not, but do you feel like in some way, the story has been written? I don't mean that only in your memoir, but just in terms of your own thinking, that a lot of the things I wondered about, a lot of the things that bothered me, I'm just trying to make sense of them. I'm spending decades trying to make sense of this story. Do you feel like some sense has been made
Well,
of it by now?
I guess I would describe it to you, Preston, this way. If you haven't been there, you don't know what I'm talking about necessarily.
Right, yeah,
But
that's right.
like I told you before, at least my memory is validated.
Mm.
I don't feel vindicated. I never tried to feel vindicated over this thing.
Yeah.
But what I wanted, what I did not want to have happen is somewhere down the road, this come out, and I'm dead and gone.
Mm.
Nobody would know the truth.
Yeah.
So, from that standpoint, I just wanted to make sure that it happened the way that I remembered it happened, and that I could prove it.
Yeah, yeah. Last question, and then we'll wrap up. This happens in, when did you arrive in Vietnam as a Marine?
I got there in July of 1967.
July 67. This takes place in March 68, so you've still got some months to go in country. In country, when you've got those months still to go in country, did you just have to kind of put this away? And because you've got a whole lot of other stuff to deal with. So is this a story that really, started to, work on you after you came home? Or do you understand what I'm saying? I mean,
No,
because I'm guessing that the months you're still in Vietnam, you've got so much to deal with when you're there.
Well, that helps keeping busy, and that's how I've survived to this day, was just keeping really busy. Because, again, I don't mean to trivialize it, but until you involved in something like that, it just there's just no reason why it happened that way. Interestingly enough, this Doom Patrol, these young men that went out there and were supposed to retrieve the remains, when they came back with the leg, the battalion commander made a big deal out of their recovery efforts and put them in for Bronze Stars for bravery. The pilots were put in for Distinguished Flying Crosses. Mm-hmm. Well, then when we found the remains, then it really blew the cover on this deal, the cover-up. And of course, then the people at the division level got involved in trying to cover it up. And General Robertson, in fact, there's a picture in there, and I won't go off into where that picture came from, but of when he came out and visited with me. But I got a message one day, and on the radio, 2 or 3 weeks after all this happened, and they asked, they said the message was from General Robertson, and he wanted to know if I thought that me and my men who went out there and retrieved him should receive Navy commendation medals or letters of commendation from him. And I said, absolutely not. We did what Marines are supposed to do. You don't get honors for that kind of stuff, and yet they were putting in, well, the background to all that is, in the Vietnam War, Bronze Stars and above were reported to the media. Navy commendation medals weren't. So they were able to cancel those Bronze Stars before the media totally got out of hand on the deal. And then they were trying to give us something, I suppose, to keep us quiet. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It is, my men, the comments I've gotten, because a lot of them are dead now, but I've sent them all copies of the book, and the comments I've gotten back from them are just amazing, and how the relief it's brought them, because they've lived with this too. Just like the cover of the book, that's a black and white picture of the spot where I buried him.
Yeah.
And one of my men had that in his scrapbook for 50 years. And he gave that to me at a reunion
Wow.
last spring in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, for that reason, I mean, I appreciate that you've written the memoir. I appreciate that you've shared your memories. As you know, there are Vietnam vets who won't, and I feel burdened by that because although there are similarities in stories, each story matters, and you know, as an outsider, I have no idea whatsoever what it's like to be in combat. But I'm grateful to the vets who do speak. You were at an event a month ago or so where I was speaking to a group of veterans and sort of reflecting on this theme of thank you for your service. You know, and usually when people say thank you for your service, they're thinking of the time when you're actually in uniform. But when I think of combat veterans, you know, that service involves, you know, carrying with you through the rest of your life the memories of combat. And you know, we've focused on this one story, but your memoir includes, you know, plenty of other rough stories. And so your service to the country doesn't involve, you know, we've been focusing on Vietnam, that 13 months in Vietnam. It involves the 50 plus years now of, you know, of really the continuing story of Vietnam, you know, in your life and the burden of that.
And you know, the shame that was put upon us by the general public in this country, you know, for having served, and you know, that sort of psychological damage is immeasurable. And that's, you know, the drug addictions of people who were in Vietnam, and I'm sure there are drug addictions in other conflicts too, but
Sure.
in ours it was so readily identifiable. That all comes from psychological damage. And going back to my service on the Wyoming Board of Parole, one thing I learned with that is that has been very applicable to my thinking about the issues in the book. Drug addiction is so psychological. Back when I was young, drug addiction seemed to be a physical addiction, and you know, you had people who were strapped down to gurneys and biting their tongue and all this sort of thing. That's a very, very small part of drug addiction. It's psychological, and the psychological damage that people suffer leads to drug addiction.
Sure.
And you have to treat that psychological damage, not the physical addiction at all. I mean, it's been an amazing learning experience for me to see that. And now I understand so much more now about Vietnam veterans in general and all those problems relating to drugs.
Yeah. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you know, talking to us again, and thanks for your memoir. And I hope that I mean, just hearing, you know, about your Marines who've read it and who've found whatever the right word is, solace or some sense of connection or something from that. That's why it's so important to share these stories. Also, just so young people can hear about it, not from people like me. I tell vets, don't leave your story to people like me. You know, tell it yourself. And that's very important. So I really appreciate
you know, one of the things that my men have said over and over as they've read the book, and what they appreciate the most is that they, excuse me, they had the confidence that maybe I did what I could do, or that sort of thing. But what has meant the most to them is after 50 years, I went ahead and followed it through and got it straightened out as far as the family and everything concerned. And that has been very, 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 very important to me. But again, you know, I felt led all along. Once I got started on this thing, I could spend an hour saying the coincidental things that happened. But what I think I feel led more than anything else is how important it is to be educated in a Christian university with the foundations and the values and the moral teachings of a place like John Brown. I don't think I'd be alive today if I hadn't have been here.
Wow.
And I say that seriously because I just couldn't have held it together.
Wow. Well, good captain to the end. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.